paraphrase the English author and philosopher Aldous Huxley, the more you know, the more you're able to see. Huxley's quote underscores the relationship between the pursuit of knowledge and the ability to observe the world around us. My name is David Suter, and I'm one of the co-founders of the /Roots Foundation, a consortium member of the OneCity project. We are here today because /Roots, alongside CAPRI, Fight for Peace, and Monogia Informatics, believe that to accelerate our progress in this collective project that is Jamaica, we need new and better ways of collaboration. Made possible through a grant provided by Foundation Botnar, the OneCity project's primary goal is to improve how we engage in urban planning and the integration of youth and young adults in society. Today's event will explore the first of 6 planned studies that make up the OneCity project. The work focuses on measuring how well the needs of communities are met. To that end, it proposes both an index as well as a dashboard for viewing various open data sets that explore a range of urban issues. Before we begin our presentation of the OneCity Explorer and subsequent panel discussion, we'll have a brief word from our sponsor, Foundation Botnar. Following that, we will have a brief overview of how we plan to interact with you, the audience, during this online event.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. At Fondation Botnar, we are honored to support CAPRI's OneCity project, an initiative that addresses the vital intersection of urbanization, youth participation, and technology. This project exemplifies our commitment to empowering young people and upholding their rights in urban and digital spaces. We view young people not just as beneficiaries, but as right holders who have the right to participate, demand accountability, and influence the world they inhabit. While technology offers powerful tools to amplify voices and expand access, we must approach its potential thoughtfully. The digital divide, rooted in inequalities of class, gender, ethnicity, education, and infrastructure, risks excluding many young people. It determines who gets to participate, whose voices are heard, and who is left behind. Our Type Cities research program, of which CAPRI's project is a vital part, critically examines these dynamics. Over 3 years, 5 global projects explore how young people in intermediary cities engage with technology in urban governance. They tackle essential questions. How do unequal social, cultural, or economic conditions affect young people's ability to use technology for participation? Does technology enhance the right to the city, or does it risk deepening existing inequalities? What mechanisms are needed to ensure that digital participation leads to accountability from city leaders and institutions? These are pivotal questions. Without addressing the structural inequalities that underpin the digital divide, we risk reinforcing existing power imbalances rather than challenging them. Meaningful participation requires collaborative accountability mechanisms, systems that ensure young people's insights are translated into concrete actions. Accountability demands partnerships across sectors where communities, civil society, and young people themselves hold decision makers to their promises. Without such mechanisms, even advanced digital tools risk becoming platforms for tokenism. Jamaica, like many other countries, has experienced rapid urban growth without sufficient expansion of infrastructure, leading to fragmented urban environments. CAPRI's work in Kingston and Montego Bay embraces this complexity. Their research aims to create urban spaces that are inclusive, equitable, and genuinely shaped by the diverse communities that inhabit them. CAPRI's findings will not only benefit Jamaica, but also inform global efforts to bridge the digital divide and uphold the rights of young people. At Fondation Botnar, we believe every young person has the right to the city, the tools to claim it, and the power to shape its future. This work, grounded in research and local realities, is a significant step toward that goal. To the CAPRI team and all involved in the OneCity project, we extend our heartfelt support. Your dedication is paving the way for positive change, and we wish you the very best of luck as you embark on this crucial journey. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Dominique Augustine. I'm so glad you could join us. We have quite the program lined up, and we want you to participate in the discussion. We'll be using Slido, which is the ultimate Q&A and polling platform for live virtual meetings and events. It's interactive and easy to use. First, you'll need to open a browser on your device, type in slido.com, then enter event code OneCity, and you are live. From here on, you'll be able to send in your questions, upvote the questions of others, and participate in live polls. We recommend stating your name and location, but this is not required. Great! You're all set to engage with us throughout this event. Now, I will hand over to Alim, who will be making a presentation on the OneCity Explorer.
Thank you, Dominique. My name is Ali Mahaber, and today I'll be presenting on the OneCity Explorer, a tool for mapping Jamaica's path to inclusive and integrated cities. Jamaica possesses the highest proportion of urban residents on informal landholdings within the Latin American and Caribbean region, surpassed only by Haiti. And this is not surprising when considering that 350,000 parcels of all occupied land lacks formal registration in the form of ownership documentation. This means that some 20% of the national population, or around 600,000 people, reside in squatter settlements, mostly located in urban areas. And this high degree of urban informality can be explained by the fact that Jamaica's rapid growth in urban population in its capital cities has been predominantly concentrated in unplanned informal settlements that have grown in number and size. This increase in unregulated developments have created a range of social, economic, and spatial challenges that have really deepened inequalities and led to a huge deal of complexities in the urban landscape. The problem now lies in how we measure and characterize these complex urban issues. Urban landscapes are dynamic, they're ever-changing, so it makes it difficult to capture reliable data on these areas. Informal settlements in particular often lack official recognition, and this results in gaps in the data that obscures the needs of large segments of the urban population. Additionally, resource constraints severely limit the ability to conduct household surveys and community-level data collection. So delays in data publication by public authorities is also a frequent issue. And in some cases, entire neighborhoods are literally left off the map in data and reports. These gaps result in a lack of comprehensive data needed to drive proactive policy formulation and the development of integrated urban planning strategies. Now, data from international organizations like the World Bank, UN Habitat, that can be used to fill in these gaps, but the data is typically based on just broad estimates rather than precise localized measurements. And while useful for national comparisons, such data sets lack the granularity needed for community-level insights. This highlights the need to bridge the gap between large-scale generalized data sets and deeply contextual neighborhood-level findings. Accurate, reliable urban data is essential. And when socioeconomic indicators are spatially represented on maps, they provide a powerful visual tool for policymakers, urban planners, and community stakeholders to highlight areas of greatest need, guide resource allocation, and inform targeted interventions. They also facilitate a better understanding of how different urban challenges intersect, offering a structured, multidimensional framework for assessing sustainable development and monitoring progress over time. This is really important in Jamaica, where urban landscapes, socioeconomic conditions are evolving rapidly, making the OneCity Explorer an essential tool. At this point, you may be asking yourself, what exactly is the OneCity Explorer? It's an online, interactive, open access dashboard designed to provide data on 14 key indicators related to urban services and quality of life. These indicators include access to electricity, sanitation, environmental vulnerability, public safety, just to name a few, all disaggregated and mapped at the community level across Jamaica's 2 major urban regions, the Greater Kingston metropolitan area and Montego Bay. In addition to these individual indicators, we have developed a composite measure called the Urban Integration Index. And by combining all 14 indicators, we calculated a score for each community, enabling us to identify areas most in need of support. The data for this project was sourced from a wide range of local and international partners. Locally, we work with state agencies like the National Water Commission, the National Solid Waste Management Authority, the Jamaica Constabulary Force, and the Jamaica Bankers Association, forming data sharing agreements and collaborative partnerships. Where local data was unavailable, we turned to online repositories such as the Humanitarian Data Exchange, GeoQuery's e-data platform, and the World Bank Data Catalog. In some cases, like the creation of the Regular Tenure Index, we developed data sets in-house at CAPRI with supervision from subject matter experts internally and on the project's advisory board. And this is the very first time that open access data sets on a variety of urban issues across Jamaica's 2 largest urban regions have been made available for anyone to view, compare, and download. And while there have been prior attempts to provide this sort of open urban data, the OneCity Explorer offers incredible depth and breadth. It covers not just national statistics, but community-level insights needed for addressing localized challenges. So with this context in mind, let's look into some of the findings for different indicators included with the OneCity Explorer. We're only going to have enough time to focus on 3 indicators in the presentation, but note that there's 12 more we hope you can look into when accessing the platform, including our Urban Integration Index. But for now, let's explore street structure. A street structure was measured using specialized software called Space Syntax to examine road network connectivity. Essentially, roads with higher connectivity, you can see it in red, typically follow the regular grid-like pattern, but roads with low connectivity, shown in green and blue, adhere to irregular tree-like patterns. As can be shown in the map, planned areas such as central downtown, most of Portmore, and parts of Hellshire exhibited well-connected grid-like street networks that were easily navigable and accessible, in contrast to unplanned areas like Riverton City and Augustown, which showed relatively poor connectivity with irregular tree-like patterns. And these disconnected networks limited access to public transport, key services, and may have also contributed to the relative socioeconomic isolation experienced in these communities. Beyond accessibility, poorly connected streets also have critical safety implications. Find that narrow, irregularly designed streets with very limited open spaces create blind spots, making it much easier for violent acts to occur unnoticed. Also, restricted access can unintentionally foster environments where gangs are able to establish control with little interference, further escalating localized violence. And this finding aligns with our Groundwork for Peace report, which revealed that all violent crimes in Jamaica are concentrated with just 1 kilometer of informal, irregularly planned communities. And mapping street structure helps to explain why violence might disproportionately affect these areas. The OneCity Explorer also examines environmental hazard vulnerability, which is a composite measure that combines 3 key hazards: flood risk, heat island effect, and air pollution. Starting with flood risk, over 50% of Jamaicans' urban communities are located in flood-prone areas, particularly in peripheral and informal settlements. And this can be explained by poor land use planning, encroachment of these areas on wetlands and riverbanks, and improper solid waste disposal. And shockingly, an estimated 25 to 35% of Jamaica's garbage ends up in gullies, obstructing drainage and increasing flood risk even further. Moving on to the heat island effect, there are big differences in average annual temperatures that were observed between urban communities. Densely populated urban areas like downtown Kingston, Portmore, Spanish Town experience much higher temperatures on average due to dense built-up infrastructure and road networks covered by heat-retaining asphalt. With climate change expected to intensify in the future, this finding really highlights the urgent need for cooling strategies, such as creating green spaces, which are currently scarce in these areas. Air quality, measured by levels of particulate matter 2.5 concentrations, the finest air pollutant particles, reveal that industrial zones and densely populated areas suffered from the poorest air quality. Areas like downtown Kingston, along Marcus Garvey Drive, and Port Royal, affected by industrial emissions, vehicle exhaust, and airport activities, showed the highest concentrations of harmful particles. And long-term exposure to particles of this kind can lead to severe health issues, including respiratory diseases, lung cancer, and higher mortality rates. And these findings emphasize the need for health impact assessments in these affected areas, as pointed out by organizations like JET, and efforts to restore ambient air quality. Lastly, we examined civic engagement, which was assessed through two primary measures: voter turnout and community engagement levels. Now, community engagement was scored based on whether the area's community development committees was active and the number of community-based organizations present in these areas. And when mapped out, the findings for community engagement were somewhat paradoxical in nature. Typically, most studies demonstrate that civic engagement is correlated with socioeconomic status, with social disorganization theory attributing lower political participation to weak informal social controls and networks in these areas. However, our findings revealed a unique duality, where high levels of civic engagement were observed at both ends of the socioeconomic spectrum. Affluent areas like Barbican and Ligony, and low-income areas like Augustin and Tivoli showed strong levels of civic engagement, both in terms of voter turnout and community activity levels. Overall, our findings reveal that most vulnerable communities face disproportionate impacts across multiple indicators. And these vulnerabilities don't exist in isolation. They are deeply interconnected. For example, poor street connectivity goes beyond limited access to essential services. As we demonstrated, street layouts can influence gang activity that may in turn exacerbate environmental risks like illegal dumping in neglected areas. And this cycle of disconnection may restrict opportunities for civic collaboration and organization in some cases. And these insights highlight the systemic nature of urban challenges. They demonstrate that no issue stands alone. Each is tied to others. Addressing these challenges requires integrated, multidimensional strategies in urban planning. But by combining spatial, socioeconomic, and participatory approaches achievable via the OneCity Explorer, we can foster more inclusive, resilient cities. While the OneCity Explorer is a promising tool, however, it's not perfect. There are still key areas for growth and improvement. The good news is that the Explorer is sustainable, which means that regular updates can be carried out to ensure that the platform continues delivering long-term value and remains relevant. It's expandable so that we can add additional data sets, for example, on road quality, green spaces, and it's going to provide further evidence and insights for users to discover in the future. The data sets themselves are refinable as we build more local partnerships, we gain access to more accurate and up-to-date data, we can further enhance the accuracy and depth of analysis. And the platform is designed to be scalable, with potential to be adapted for other urban regions in Jamaica, across the Caribbean region as well, in order to address broader regional needs. So building on the gaps identified, the OneCity Explorer holds great potential to drive meaningful change in Jamaica's urban planning and policymaking. It can help to bridge the data gap by providing data sets on an assortment of urban issues and quality of life measures that integrate spatial and socioeconomic data. In doing so, stakeholders can be empowered, and it equips them with the data needed for evidence-based decision-making, fostering more inclusive and informed planning. And by using visual tools to pinpoint areas of greatest need, we can strategically allocate resources and focus interventions where they will have the most impact, ensuring these communities are empowered to thrive in the long term. In order to realize this vision, collaboration and innovation are key. So we encourage organizations, especially those listening, to reach out and hopefully partner with us in unlocking the full potential of this tool for transformative urban planning. Thank you. To tell you more about navigating the dashboard and unlocking its full potential, I now hand you over to our communications lead for OneCity, Morgan Phillips.
Thank you, Aleem. And good evening, everyone. Now I'll take you through how to access OneCity Explorer. Start by going to capricaribbean.org/OneCity. This brings you to the homepage for OneCity. Click on the OneCity Explorer icon, which will take you to the dashboard that was designed by the Mona Geoinformatics Institute, Mona GIS. Once the dashboard has loaded, you will see a map of Jamaica displaying the study areas of Kingston and Montego Bay. To zoom in or out on the map, you can hover over the area and scroll with your mouse, or use the plus and minus icons in the bottom right corner of the map. You will notice that the value of the scale bar in the bottom left corner of the map adjusts to represent the extent of the map displayed. You can also see that the communities listed in the table on the left center of the screen adjust to reflect the areas showing as you zoom in or out. At the top right of your screen, you'll see double drop-down arrows, which you can click to expand and find more tools to navigate the dashboard. The first tool option available is the search bar, which allows you to type in a specific community or to use your current location. The bookmark icon allows you to toggle easily between the Kingston metropolitan area, the St. James area, and all of Jamaica. The base maps icon allows you to change the style of the map that you're looking at. This is a stylistic feature with plenty of options. Let's try the National Geographic Style map. Now that we know the basics, let's cover how to understand the data presented on the dashboard. Each of the 14 indicators and the Urban Integration Index is represented by a layer on the map. The dashboard automatically starts with all 15 layers on, so you can see their data. When you click on a community, the name of the community comes up on the right side of the screen. Then, click on the bottom where it says 1 of 15, and that allows you to see the values for each layer or indicator. To understand what these numbers mean, you can consult the left side of the dashboard, where there's the panel that explains what each indicator means, and the legend that explains the ranking of the values. Let's start with the Irregular Tenure Index. The value of 3.83 corresponds with a low score. The panel above tells us that a higher percentage indicates greater land tenure insecurity, which means that this community has low insecurity, or rather relatively high security of land tenure. The next indicator is water scarcity. When I scroll down, I can see the legend for this indicator. And when I click the right arrow in the center left panel, it takes me from land tenure to access to water. And this right arrow takes you through all the indicators right through to the Urban Integration Index. When you click on a layer, you'll see a symbol that looks like an eye with a slash through it, which means that the layer is not visible. So you can continue clicking on the layers until you're left with just the ones that you want to analyze. Since Aleem talked about the relationship between improper waste disposal and flooding, let's look at waste management and environmental hazards indicators. So I'll click to hide all the layers except those two. Whichever layers are turned on will also be displayed in the legend section so that you can interpret the data. When I click on Rosetown, I can see that it has a low sanitation index. When I scroll to the description box, it says that higher values indicate better access to solid waste services. So this means that Rosetown has insufficient waste collection services. And then we look at the environmental hazard score, which is very high. By looking at both layers, we can see what might be a relationship between the two indicators, although we know that the environmental hazards indicator also considers other factors besides flooding, like heat levels and air pollution. When looking at a single layer, you are able to easily use the color gradient to understand the indicator values. For example, we can see that Friendship Community has a lower education score than Johns Hall. You can click on the bottom right corner of the dashboard to go back to the OneCity website where you have access to download all the indicator datasets. If you need further guidance on how to navigate the dashboard, you can download our user manual. I hope you feel ready to use OneCity Explorer. Now I'll hand over to Dr. Patricia Green, who will share her perspective on OneCity Explorer as a tool for urban planning.
Good evening, and thank you, Morgan, for that demonstration. You know, the OneCity indicator that I'm most excited about is the number one, irregular land tenure, and measures the proportion of informal irregular land in communities. Augustown has a very high, in fact, it's the highest, and it has an index of 89.89. Pepin is also high with 26.78. Now, I have selected these two communities because they have been generationally settled lands stemming from Hope, Mona, Pepin plantations granted to formerly enslaved persons, therefore requiring special elaboration inside immersion research and dialogues on land decolonization. And we think about this community because these plantations have evolved in the Ligonier Plain as the Ligonier Plain and into urban settings. And we need to do better in engaging everyday citizens in issues of urban planning and governance. I am suggesting that we should have conversations on urban planning and governance with children in schools. They take this information home to parents. The nation needs a safe space where persons can be transparent, a place that seeks to unite persons along common parameters, a space that transcends any seemingly partisan political divide, a space where the youth has a voice, a space to enjoy freedom of expression, a space that creates more inclusive, safe, and sustainable urban environments. OneCity Explorer provides such a space. I defend, argue, and embrace this to identify deficiencies in access to service and advocate for improvements in quality of life. OneCity Explorer has the capacity to engage our youth in conversations over architecture. Hence, let us use this tool to have that conversation and illustrate it by working examples. Allow our youth to showcase these. Questions are, how do we design buildings that remain cool naturally and reduce carbon footprints? Let the youth answer. How do we ensure the architecture is resilient in earthquakes and hurricanes? How do we preserve the natural environment, the cultural landscape to sustain our unique Jamaican architecture as modern and relevant? How do we ensure that there's a generation that knows how to design for this sustainability? These are issues that we can ponder as we head into the panel discussion moderated by Dr. Diana Thorburn. Thank you so much.
4, 3. Thank you, Dr. Green and
Morgan and Dominique and Aline. I'm having a bit of an out-of-body experience here because I'm seeing a lot of this for the first time, and as Director of Research at CAPRI, I've just kind of been glaring at everybody for the past year, wondering what they were really up to. You know, we set all of this out in a proposal 2 years ago, and to see that it's actually a reality is really quite an astonishing experience for me personally. But thank you for being with us.
Diana.
Thank you for being with us this evening. And I have in studio with me Alexander Coswell, who is the project lead on OneCity. He's a CAPRI fellow. And Dr. Robert Kinlock, who's a lecturer in the Department of Geography and Geology at the University of the West Indies, Mona. And I just want to start with a little bit of a context for those who are joining us and who just want to have a little bit of a grounding in what we're doing here, why we're here. But before I do that, I want to direct people to Slido. Slido is our online tool which will allow you to pose questions and vote up questions. But there's also a poll that I would like you to all do about the Explorer, and at the end of the evening we will share the results of the poll, and if we have a chance I'll share them with you as well, so we can talk about that if we have some time. But Alexandra, I just want you to give some context for people who are watching who might be a little confused, like CAPRI, OneCity, what's this all about? Youth, governance, technology. Just give a little, as brief as you can, overview of what OneCity is, what the relationship is with CAPRI, who our partners are, and what this is about. It's one of 6 studies. David said that at the very beginning, but just give us a little overview of OneCity.
All right, as brief as I can. So OneCity is a 3-year multi-study project led by CAPRI, but in conjunction with our research partners, /Roots Foreign Foundation, Fight for Peace, and Mona Geoinformatics. And it's taking 3 years because we're looking at the nexus of urban governance, technology, and youth participation, and all aspects of that intersecting topic, or the intersecting topics. And we started out with what you're seeing a product of now, which is a baseline study of the environment in which urban youth live, which just happens to be the environment in which we all urban residents live. But this baseline study looks at the habitat in which our youth develop, and what improvements need to be made to, particularly to marginalized communities within that habitat. And from there, we, as CAPRI, in conjunction with our research partners, are going to go on to look at different aspects of youth participation, such as institutions that may be there that can be improved upon to improve youth participation in their own governance, in their own communities. And also, we're also going to look at youth in what we're calling securitized communities that are very prone to, unfortunately, gang violence, and thus have an extra police presence regularly. And we're also going to look at different forms of what you call digital public infrastructure that can be used to facilitate or catalyze the integration of marginalized youth, and really all Jamaica's youth for the next generation to be more deeply connected with one another and with the world. And so I'll leave it there for now. He asked me to be brief.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Kinlock, you're not only a lecturer in geography, you're also a member of our advisory committee. But I want to put on your lecturer hat for this question, which is just give some context of where we are in Jamaica in thinking about this urban space that we occupy, mainly in Kingston and Montego Bay, which is where we are working on now for this particular part of the project. And just give us some context of what this dashboard, what these indicators mean in terms of the urban challenges faced by us here in Jamaica, in Kingston and Montego Bay.
All right, thank you, Diana. So like with, many, it's a typical experience of many global south or developing countries that we are faced with significant challenges in our urban area. And as Alim had highlighted, not only do we have these challenges, but we are confronted with issues related to the interconnectivity of these challenges. a platform like that is provided by OneCity will of course provide, it's a good data repository, a very useful data repository, a repository that I think is very, very needed at this time, because more and more we are making data-driven decisions in urban planning. When we think about how planning has evolved over the last few years in the context of big data analytics, and so we're finding more complex solutions that are necessary for the complex problems that confront urban areas. So as a lecturer, and in my capacity as a researcher as well, students will be able to use this data and generate or derive insights that might perhaps inform useful urban solutions. And even in my own research, and other researchers can of course use it to inform planning.
I want to go off of that if I can a bit. And so each study that we're doing is not just a research paper that is being produced, but each study is supposed to be accompanied by digital artifacts, solutions for problems. And the first study, we're launching the artifact for it now, the dashboard. It's not just to be a research tool, a data repository. We want it to be a tool that public policy and urban governance stakeholders use in coordination. Because one of the challenges that you find in countries like Jamaica, as in many developing countries, that there's very little collaboration or information sharing between state agencies and civic society organizations that aim to improve either youth participation or urban governance challenges. And so we want this to be a tool not just for research, but that policymakers and people who work in civil society can actually use to plan their own activities.
Okay, well, we already have quite a few questions coming in on Slido, and some of them are hard questions, but I'm going to put them to you first, Alexander, and then see if Robert can save you if you're not managing. But how is this index different? I'm going to combine a couple of the questions. How is this urban integration index different from other urban inequality measures out there, such as the Community Renewal Index? And is this index one that has been used before? Have you created it from scratch? And yeah, I think I'll just combine. And how did you arrive at these 14 indicators? So talk about the architecture of the index itself, and where did you get it from, and why these indicators?
So these indicators, well, no research is really done from scratch. These indicators were chosen in-house, but they were, I'd say, borrowed or modified from several different indicators that exist in the global research sphere. For example, the Civic Education Index, we borrowed wholesale from the OECD's Better Life measure of civic education. Many of the other indicators we borrowed from the UN Habitat's own goals, which inspired a lot of what we're doing. And so it is different from community renewal indices, mainly because we are, one, honing in on what our own research has determined matters the most in terms of bringing change to these communities. So the Community Renewal Index, GRACE Index, it's very expansive, covers a wide range of things. But we decided to stay focused on what we think are the key change makers, because the goal is different. The Community Renewal Index, the goal might be just to improve civic life in a space, improve their access to green spaces. That's a worthwhile goal. Our goal is integration. We want to inform civic society work and public policy work that wants to foster greater integration between the communities, so that you don't, not just to make individual communities that might be semi-isolated slightly better, but to make them plugged in. So we have one, as the name suggests, one city, one civic space. And so, for example, the Community Renewal Index will focus a lot on land tenure security issues, but they also focus on things like housing quality index and that kind of thing. And that's important, the housing quality, what the important study. But what we're interested in is not just the housing quality, but how connected the people are to the communities. And we had to include indices that wouldn't be included in other indices like the community renewal program, such as street structure. Very few. We didn't find any research that had really analyzed the interconnectivity or lack thereof of street structure in the urban space. And so that we had to do on our own and utilize a new methodology to be able to measure that on our own.
Okay.
Could I,
yes,
if I could
please.
add to that, you know, one of the strengths of the index really is its integration of physical, social, and economic dimensions, and of course political dimensions as well. It has. I've not seen any indices that, or index rather, that combines, for example, you know, the urban heat island effect, for example, or those climate indicators, temperature change and stuff like that, with these social indicators. And I think not only that, it has not necessarily been done within the context of, you know, Jamaica. Now, one of the things that went into the creation of the index is that a lot of data mining had to be done. But in addition to mining the data had to be processed and stuff like that. You got the information, they got information from, you know, doing interviews, stakeholder interviews. That type of data is not going to necessarily be so readily available in the public domain. So I think it does a good job at aggregating these data sets that already exist in other places that are useful with data sets that were you know, essentially created that, you know, would not be available elsewhere. So yeah, I think that's where its uniqueness really lies.
All right, so back from Slido again. And this is one of the harder questions, Alexander, but I'll let you take a shot at it. Sure. Doesn't visualizing disparities in a tool like this, in this tool in particular, risk stigmatizing certain communities?
Well, all right. I think we anticipated this question when we were doing the research. And the truth is that, you know, many communities in Jamaica have retained the stigma for far too long because they've been stuck in the same place for far too long. And it's because a lot of people who live in much nicer, more formal areas don't have much of an idea or don't give much of a thought to what keeps these communities back or held back in the same place for so long. What is it that they're really lacking? And it's important, we thought it was important to bring that to the public for the first time, to show that what really keeps a community like Augustown back, as Dr. Green said, a very old community. It's been here since the 1800s. We still refer to it as an informal community, even though they've lived on this land for some time. But they simply lack legal titles to the land they live on. That's a disparity that needs to be highlighted because we still refer to them as an informal community. When that doesn't really capture that, puts them in the same category as squatters. It doesn't really capture what the truth of this situation. And we need the public to be aware of these disparities, so that they can put it out there, lobby policymakers to make those improvements, or else nothing will change.
I think one of the other useful aspects of that is I think for somebody from the general public to be able to see what these disparities are, particularly when these are communities that are right beside their own communities, which is what the other question that I wanted to ask you, Robert, which is about how can this tool actually inform whether it's decision makers or policy makers or community activists, politicians even perhaps, councillors. What do you see as a utility in terms of the real life practicability of something like this in terms of pushing for more integration, for promoting these communities not just to be better communities within themselves, but to be more integrated into the broader society?
All right. Thank you for that question. And I would say that one of the biggest or the most significant strengths of this tool is its ability to, you know, kind of visualize or spatially represent these kind of nuances in our social, economic, physical landscape and stuff. It has very significant value at various levels, and you know, at the top, if you're looking at it from a kind of top-down technocratic perspective, it can of course inform urban planning quite a bit. Policymakers can of course remember also we operate in constraints of significant. We operate in the context rather of significant economic constraints. And so, you know, when policymakers can now identify and visualize data, that some of that data is already exists, probably in a tabular format or so, but when we can actually visualize that data in a spatial format, we can deliver a more targeted approach, and this is particularly important in the context of you know, resource constraints or lack of resources that might not be available. You want to ensure that allocation is most efficient, and the areas that need the most significant intervention are actually getting that intervention. And on that note, so I spoke about it from a kind of top-down perspective. From a bottom-up perspective now, we can look at the way in which this data can potentially empower grassroots organizations, for example, to secure funding for particular initiatives in a community. It could be something as simple as, you know, maybe developing a neighborhood park or you know, something. You know, lots of times when organizations are out there ready to give out money, they want a solid justification for why this money should be allocated. And so, yeah, I think this data is the availability of the data really. It has that special quality of empowerment, and so I think from a bottom-up perspective as well as from a top-down perspective, we can of course facilitate better integration.
All right. So there's quite a few questions about the mechanics of all of this, Alexander. So. How will I'm going to let you answer all of these together. How will the OneCity Explorer tool be maintained after the project is done? 1, why aren't other parishes included? 2, that question came up quite a few times. And how will you be updating the data? How regularly will it be updated, and who's going to be updating it?
All right. So let me go to the question about the scope first, the parish scope. So we received, you know, this project is funded by a grant that was targeted towards urban areas. And so we set out to do the 2 largest urban areas in Jamaica, the Kingston metropolitan area, metropolitan region, we should say, because we're including Spanish Town and Portmore in those areas, and Greater Montego Bay. And ideally, we would have loved to cover all urbanizing areas across the country, but we kind of limited ourselves from the outset because we knew that it was going to be challenging getting all the available data on all communities. We took a full year to gather all this data together and put it in our dashboard, and we still got it by missed by the line by this much. And we knew it would have been challenging to do it in the chat, but ideally we would like to see it expanded across Jamaica. Of course, that's going to come. Have to renegotiate with our partners for it, see if they really want to still work with us after doing that. But so CAPRI is going to maintain this dashboard as is. We hope for it to have a life of its own after the OneCity project. Many cities around the world, many cities around the world have adopted what you call urban exploratories, that the institutions like think tanks or universities maintain, and we see this OneCity Explorer as being the possible foundation for a urban exploratory that could have continual use for policymakers and civil society in Jamaica. And the short answer to this is we fully intend for it to have a life of its own, and we will maintain it, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Okay, all right. Well, that actually takes us to another question about, you mentioned something called an urban exploratory in other countries. Are
Sorry,
there
urban observatory.
urban observatory?
Yes.
Well, I like exploratory too. That can work. So this question is: are there examples of successful interventions based on indices like this in other cities or countries in the global south? Is there a proof of concept of how this kind of data and access to it has been used anywhere else that we could be modeling ourselves off of or aspiring towards?
For an index or observatory like this, boy, I'd have to look and tell you but the research like this, especially as it relates to, I just returned from the World Urban Forum, this year's stage of the World Urban Forum in Egypt, and a lot of these projects were based on, a lot of the showcase projects on countries such across Latin America and the Caribbean were started based on research on urban challenges that existed in some places, underutilized areas, neglected areas that policymakers had no reason to pay attention to before. And independent researchers showed the value of investing in these communities.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to point to any particular index, and that can be compared to the OneCity index or any particular observatory.
Mm-hmm. But
there's a reason why these observatories retain their funding and retain their support, even in state institutions, because the policymakers find them useful for maintaining, upgrading, coordinating, and planning the upgrading of their urban areas. So,
are you familiar with other indices like this, Robert, that are used in any other places? I mean, it's a first for Jamaica, which we're very proud of course. But is this something that's standard in the world of urban geography elsewhere?
Well, I mean, yes. Indices are a standard tool that's they've been extensively used. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of things like the physical quality of life index. There's also, even indices that many people might be more familiar with, like, for example, the HDI, but then that doesn't give you, that's a human development index, but it doesn't give you sub-country nuances. It's kind of at the national level. And when you go onto the website of the World Bank or, some of these other international organizations, they will have metrics that, that provide indicators. And these metrics, of course, inform many of the, it does inform many of the decisions that are taken in many of these developing countries. The problem with a lot of that data that is online, though, is that it is not adequately downscaled to a large extent. And I think that is where we're getting perhaps more value in this index because of the extent to which the data is downscale and represents the kind of finer spatial variations that exist. So do indicators exist? Yeah, there are many of them. I have not seen many of them that represent integration in the way that this one does.
And as Alim would have pointed out in his presentation, a lot of these indicators that exist in the global research sphere are national, and national indicators are not always so useful. Our goal is to provide useful information, useful data, useful comparative data, and the more granular you can make it, the more useful it will be to relevant stakeholders.
Well, I also just attended a evidence conference in South Africa, and the term for that is proximate, apparently. So the more proximate you are to the data and to the actuality of what the data is talking about, is the more propitious the solutions that you're putting forward. Alexander, the indicators, do they address the needs of marginalized and vulnerable groups? And what are the plans for using this tool to demarginalize, I suppose, specifically urban youth, and you mentioned just urban populations in general?
Yes. So as I would have mentioned, the first study in the OneCity project, which this dashboard represents, is a study of the habitats in which our urban youth live. All our urban youth, so that's why it covers the entire urban areas. And that is a way to, as a first step, it's a baseline study to then go on to study the experiences of marginalized youth themselves and how to improve their participation. But there are some insights in this dashboard itself, which is mainly that we're studying the lack of reach of several social services and public services, and that those intersect heavily with a topic that CAPRI has been speaking on for a couple of months, the informality, the lack of secure land tenure in these communities. That's what, when we refer to marginalized communities in Jamaica, we're often referring to the informal communities. And so what the index is showing is the degree to which, it's an integration index, but the inverse of that, it's showing the degree to which certain communities are marginalized, in other words, neglected by state services, and displaying that to the public is the first step towards getting them to address it. And not only that, it's not about just shedding light on this issue, but we're combining a bunch of different measures or different indicators because we want to create the beginnings of a roadmap to integrating these marginalized communities. That is the goal behind this project. So it is about these marginalized communities, the people in them, but we're kind of getting at their issues by studying their environments.
All right, so I want to go to the poll and see what they have said. So there are two questions. One is, which OneCity indicator do you think is most important for improving the quality of life in your community? And the top one was land tenure security, access to improved water and sanitation, access to solid waste services, access to basic mobility, and access to education. Those were the ones. Street structure, employment, access to health care. And the other question was about, are there any other indicators you'd like to see included in future updates to the OneCity Explorer? And so I'm going to read these out, but I'm going to ask both of you to close and just reflect in the last few seconds that we have on any other indicator that you think should be there. So these are some of the ones that are there. Food insecurity, access to transportation, but that's there already, isn't it? Access to communication services.
That's there already as well.
That's there with
ICT.
Okay. Road quality. I thought of that as well.
Road quality. I think everybody's thinking about that right
now. Everybody's thinking about road quality right now. Green space availability, walkability, and access to employment.
So that, I mean, I think if we had, unfortunately, I have to say, I think if we had a walkability score everywhere in Jamaica, would get a very low. Everywhere we get a very low score. So I don't think we even bothered to. It was an option actually. We could have done it with the space syntax. It allows us to do that quite easily. But it's everything was just going to get a very low score. We assumed. So, but it's something to consider for the future, especially. But we wanted to keep it basic in the short term. But in the future, this can quickly expand as well. Any ideas?
Okay.
I'm thinking as well that one of the things, and I'm really not sure how we're going to get this, but access to private safety nets, private insurance schemes, those types of safety nets. Lots of times people, it is a significant determinant of quality of life in urban areas and by extension integration. Youth do not access health care, not just youth, people are limiting their access to health care because they don't have insurance. And so I think that would be another one of those social indicators that might present for us very significant value when we're looking at the terrains of integration and and the factors that perhaps marginalize or exclude youth or people living in urban environments. So I would include that one.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this very enlightening discussion. Again, I'm still coming out of my out-of-body experience with all of this. It's very proud of all the work that you've done and the work that the team has done. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for the presentations. And I'm going to hand back to David to close us out.
We have now reached the end of our event. We'd like to thank Foundation Botnar for the funding that has made this project possible, the various public sector agencies, community organizations, advocates, and residents whose input has contributed to our work. The OneCity Explorer can be found on CAPRI's website at capricaribbean.org/OneCity. As mentioned before, this is the first of 6 studies, and we look forward to seeing you at future events where the outputs of this work will be shared. Good evening.
Is brought to you by the Office of the